Welcome back, gang. You've hopefully viewed part one and are ready for the showdown. Apologize ahead of time. I think this one's going to be a little bit longer, but you won't want to miss it. This is, I think, probably the most important story of Elijah. So remember, everyone is gathered in 1 Kings 18:20. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. So the prophets of Baal are there and the people of Israel are there. And then we come to verse 21. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. So Elijah's not accusing them of apostasy. That's a fancy term meaning abandoning their faith in God, in Yahweh. And in a way, it's worse what he's accusing them. They were worshiping both the Lord and Baal. They were hedging their bets. One of them will see them through. If Yahweh lets them down, they could turn to Baal and vice versa. Best to just sit on the fence. Now, until the drought's over, things were doing pretty well. That kind of system, having two gods. But the true God doesn't play that game. You can't serve two masters. Elijah points out the spiritual unhealthiness of that kind of life. The Hebrew word translated here as waver. How long will you waver before two opinions? Is pasak, meaning to limp. How long will you limp or hobble after both gods? To me, he's implying their indecision is crippling them. That last sentence says a lot. The people said nothing. Perhaps part of it was to avoid persecution from Ahab and Jezebel, but perhaps it was that they were not ready to get off the fence. Best to keep both gods happy. It was time to get the showdown on the road. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bowls for us. Let them choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bowl and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God." Then all the people said, "What you say is good." So the people think it's a good idea. Elijah's proposing a contest here, isn't he? But notice that it's a contest, a showdown not between the prophets. It's a showdown between God and Baal. If the people wouldn't answer, God would, and let the showdown begin. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bowls and prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bowl given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. "O Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered, and they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." I have to tell you, Elijah questioning if Baal is busy is much more taunting and disrespectful in Hebrew. Elijah is suggesting that perhaps their great God is on the toilet. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. So imagine all that. The prophets shouted, pleaded, danced, drew their own blood. They spent all day. And did Baal come through? It says Baal didn't respond. Baal didn't answer. Baal didn't pay attention. So it's now the true God's turn. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins, probably destroyed by Jezebel. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it, large enough to hold 2 seahs, it's about 13 quarts of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bowl into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he ordered, and they did it the 3rd time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. So I imagine most of us have been camping before, right? You've ever been camping? You can't light a fire with wet wood. So what was Elisha thinking? You can't, but God can. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Did Elijah shout, plead, dance, draw blood, like the other prophets? Do anything flashy? No. He simply prayed. Did Elijah draw attention to himself? No. He simply prayed. Did Elijah try to take on the false prophets of Baal in his own power? No. He simply prayed for God's power. Did Elijah try to manipulate God into doing what Elijah wanted? No. He prayed that God would affirm what God had been telling his people, and that is all good lessons for our prayer life. And what happened? Verse 38. Here's the biggie. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." So just in case your thoughts are going to a natural explanation, like maybe this was a natural phenomenon, like a huge lightning bolt, I want you to notice that even the stone was burned up, something a lightning bolt wouldn't do. So 2 things happen here. God demonstrated his power in a very big way, and the people reacted toward God in a very big way. For the moment, the people see the light. And that was the pun intended there. The people saw the light. God orchestrated a very dramatic event. It was not a quick one. He started with stopping the rain and ended with the fire, and that took a couple of years. He's not quite finished. Spoiler alert is that the rains are coming, but we'll get to that next week. What was God's point in all this? He's not willing to share our attention, our love, our devotion, our worship with other quote-unquote gods. He does not want the nation of Israel or us to rely on anyone or anything but him. So from this story, what could be an overarching concept? I suggest this. God really cares whether our hearts are his. Not just whether our hearts are his, but whether they're wholly and completely his, and whether they're only his. For those of you who have been following this study from the beginning, remember me ending, I think it was the first week, with the question, today, what idols and other gods do we need to watch out for? Hopefully you've given that some thought. If not, go ahead and hit the pause button. Think about it. Today, what idols and other gods do we need to watch out for? So we've all thought about that. So we might all be thinking, this whole issue doesn't really apply to us. thinking things like, I definitely don't have I don't have other idols of gods sitting on my mantle. I guard against letting things like materialism or power from becoming idols. I don't try to hedge my bets by taking astrology or New Age concepts seriously. I don't mix and match concepts from other religions. So I've got God's lessons from the story of Elijah down pretty well. But there is something we might overlook. I know it's something I'm guilty of overlooking. It might be easiest to bring it up with a quote. Woodrow Kroll, he has a Back to the Bible radio program. I don't know if he came up with this, but or just repeated it, but it's this. I think there are two lessons in life, according to Woodrow Kroll. Lesson 1, there is a God. Lesson 2, you are not him. Do you ever catch yourself missing lesson 2? Hopefully not all the time. Maybe not verbalizing it, but do you ever say, I believe in God, but I want to run my own life when dealing with this or that? Or think, God, you're in charge of my life, but don't trouble yourself with these 3 things. I've got them under control myself. Or we may take very seriously that God's will be done, but what about when my will is being done? Each time we're choosing to run our own lives or taking charge or vetoing God's will with our own, aren't we elevating ourselves to godness, or trying to? Or putting it another way, just like those who worshiped Baal, aren't we choosing another alternative to God to meet our needs? Think about that. Okay, let's stop there. Let's get to the rain to come next week, next time. And let's also find out this picture, this statue I've been bringing up. Let's find out what that statue's all about. So we'll look at that next week. Till then, take care and stay healthy.